Are you examining disciplinary policies? Looking to develop a path towards accountability for racial incidents in your community? Or you've recently discovered the term restorative justice and you're curious if you know exactly what it means or if it's right for you? Well, you're in the right place. And if you want to get some practice responding to racial incidents or matters of equity and inclusion in your school or district, join my colleague Crystal and I for our next live tea time. Check out the link in the description to sign up.
It's tea time, equity time.
Let's get into it. Hey there, good people. It's me, Jessica Anderson, Equity Strategist and Marketing Project Manager from Education Elements. This is Tea Time, an explainer series all about racial equity for learning organizations. And for this episode, we are talking about 5 common myths about restorative justice. And if you want more resources around racial equity and various forms of diversity, equity, and inclusion in your community, be sure to check out our website for more. So, what exactly is restorative justice? Well, let's take a step back and think about our approaches to discipline and justice in different ways. So a punitive approach, or punitive justice, focuses on laws rather than harm and responds to laws being broken with suffering, isolation, and removal from the community. In the classroom, we can see some clear examples of this when students are physically removed from the class, right? We may send them to the principal's office, serve them detentions, school suspensions, or expulsion. The focus is less on addressing the harm and more on communicating severity or detriment. And our response is often to take away resources and care in response to harm, rather than working together to understand and address why that harm happened in the first place. Well, that's precisely where restorative justice comes in. Restorative justice is an alternative approach that is defined by Howard Zehr of the Zehr Institute for Restorative Justice as a process that involves, to the extent possible, those who have a stake in a specific offense to then collectively identify and address harms, needs, and obligations in order to heal and put things as right as possible. It's a practice that formed in the 1970s to respond to some of the challenges of the Western legal system. But it's critical to name that several aspects of the foundational practices of restorative justice, including talking circles, have been adopted from indigenous peacemaking practices from around the world. Now, where restorative justice focuses on the specific incident and the particular stakeholders involved, transformative justice goes a step further to examine the systems and the culture that allowed for or encouraged such incidents to occur. Transformative justice seeks to investigate the systems and culture, and to also bring learning, healing, and transformation to the larger community where harm takes place. Miriam Kaba, the founder and director of Project NIA, once said,
because of its focus on the individual, the intervention is on individuals, not the system. And what transformative justice, people, advocates, and people who have kind of begun to be practitioners in that have said is, we have to also transform the conditions that make this thing possible.
One of the biggest myths that come with restorative justice is that people view it as simply an alternative to suspension. It is much more than that. It is a mindset and a cultural shift. A study was conducted at Rutgers where researchers surveyed 412 students across 29 classrooms where teachers had received restorative justice training specifically. And what they found was that the more teachers immersed themselves in restorative practices, the better students rated their experiences with those teachers. Those same strong relationships sparked a greater sense of respect between the teachers and students and ultimately led to fewer disciplinary referrals. A second myth about restorative justice is that it boils down to a checklist of actions that we need to implement. Steps that we do. Reflection, check. Talking circle, check. This checklist, it's gonna be a no for me. Kathy Evans, an associate professor of education and the co-author of The Little Book of Restorative Justice in Education, talks about how restorative justice can't just be a set of things we do. It has to be a framework for how we view teaching and learning. This practice is rooted in the principle that every member of the community should be treated with dignity and respect. Everyone should have a voice. For example, the circle process ensures that every stakeholder involved in an incident is heard. Multiple perspectives are considered. And in that same Rutgers study, they found that students began to take the school's rules more seriously as they felt more invested in their relationships with the school and the community. But there are other studies that support that. Jason Okonafor, a psychology professor, led a 2016 study that found that interventions to encourage empathy and empathetic discipline cut suspension rates in half and caused shifts in students' perspectives, including an increase in feelings of respect, as well as motivations to behave better. But all that said, it is important that I name that suspensions and disciplinary action are not equally distributed across students of all backgrounds. There is an abundance of research that exposes the disproportionate rates that Black and brown students are suspended relative to white students. Researchers at Stanford found that Black students are given more extreme punishment for the exact same infractions produced by white students. So, while we are talking about the need for alternative approaches to discipline in schools, we have to also ask ourselves, who exactly is being disciplined? A study published in the National Association of School Psychologists looked at suspension data from a Colorado school district, and what they found was that while restorative justice practices reduced suspensions, Black students still received disproportionately more suspensions than their peers. I'm actively considering pouring out this tea altogether. Excuse me while I try to make it make sense. I say all this to say, debunked myth number 3 is restorative justice is not your one-stop solution to addressing racism in schools, racial disparities in school discipline, or inequitable school culture. Well, the 4th common myth held about restorative justice is that it is a strategy best implemented when community members can choose to opt in. Everyone gets to decide whether or not they would like to use it to address issues in the classroom. So, Ms. Jenkins uses it in her classroom, but Ms. Lieberman doesn't. And we like it that way. Well, remember that study I shared earlier conducted at Rutgers? Anne Gregory, the lead researcher, shared that part of what the student study revealed was that people at every level of the school community need to be on board and fully immersed in both the practice and philosophy of restorative justice. If you partially commit, you'll get partial results. You'll communicate that the status quo for discipline is indeed still the prioritized model for addressing behavior. The 5th myth, I'll give in just a second. But let me say this, if you want to get some practice working through real life scenarios that require an equitable and inclusive lens, join me and my colleague Crystal Shu for weekly tea time conversations where we practice different ways to respond to situations. You can use the link in the caption to sign up. Now, the 5th and final myth is that these results I just spoke of will come right away. I can already see it. Mr. Radcliffe crafts an email along the lines of, "Dear Jessica, we started applying restorative justice practices in our school this month, but I am concerned as we are not seeing any significant changes in behavior with our students." Well, here's the thing. Remember how I said this is a cultural shift, a mindset shift, and not simply a list of action items to complete? Cultural shifts take time. By virtue of what you are doing, you are assisting yourself and your students in unlearning what discipline, community, and accountability looks like. They've been taught a particular set of values all of their lives, which also may vary depending on their background. That doesn't suddenly go away in a few weeks. Give the process time. Continue to invest in the change. In the end, we need to move towards the kind of justice that not only transforms us as people, but also transforms the culture. So no matter where you are in your journey today, ask yourself, what kinds of community infrastructure can we create to support more safety, transparency, sustainability, care, and connection? What are the skills we need to be able to prevent, respond to, heal from, and take accountability for harmful behaviors? What do those harmed and students who have caused harm need? What are some of the conditions, behaviors, and practices in our community that help set the stage for students' behavior, and how can we change this? If you're shifting to restorative or transformative justice practices in your school, let us know about it in the comments. What's working for you? Folks, do me a favor, click the subscribe button to know when the next Tea Time episode comes out. You can even check out my latest video with tips for facilitating DEI conversations. This episode's Teabag mantra is brought to you by Kayla Faris, licensed therapist. You don't need to earn your rest. All right, folks, take care, and I will see you on the flip side.